ever had trouble making a decision? I have. I mean, I would make about 100 indecisions in a year, which I suppose in a way is saying that you're making a decision not to make any decisions.
I was 19 years old. I was in the Army, and I was nowhere close to home. I was thousands of miles away from home.
It is, how do you say, more cost effective to buy a pickup truck than to have a kid.
The way I see it, this prison industrial complex system ain't nothing but a byproduct of manifest destiny.
And he says to me, most conspiratorially, in case they riot.
I burn one page at a time, sitting on the floor of the shower. It is dark out, and I burn one after the other, never more than 3 at the same time, because the smoke can go out the window and tell them where you are.
What is a sleeping brain's favorite rock band? REM. But a couple weeks later, I was in my tiny little NYU room the night before the surgery, and I don't think I ever felt more alone.
My mom has a way of coming on really strong until you realize it's just her way of fighting for you.
My name is Mary Pat. So what are you, like a jewelry salesman or something? I'm a pimp.
The last obstacle was a series of 6-foot walls that were painted with the names of sins that we would have to get over in order to serve Jesus.
So I have to know myself, love myself, lose myself, and get over myself. It's like I'm dating myself, but with a copay.
Her all-consuming love for me cloaked me like a cashmere blanket in August.
From the second we stepped into that infertility clinic, everything felt clinical.
I used to be a person who spoke only for other people. I was told not to tell anyone anything. So now I tell everyone everything.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Totally True Things, a socially conscious storytelling show. I am Jude Trader-Wolf, your host, and I put this show together for one reason, because the pandemic took away all of our stages, and there were all these solo performers and storytellers with long-form stories to tell and nowhere to tell them. So here we are with another series that you just saw clips from the shows in this particular series that running from February until the first week in May. If you're watching us for the first time tonight, just know that you could still subscribe to this series and see all of those shows for $65. A lot of show, a lot of information, and a lot of inspiration and enrichment for $65, because these shows record automatically and we will send you the links and you can watch them at your convenience. Snacks by your side, because you don't want to get up in the middle, because they're very compelling, just so you know. Usually our format is a solo show followed by a discussion with someone who has expertise on the theme that's explored in that show. Or sometimes we have long form stories, 3 or 4 storytellers, and then an expert on the theme that those stories are about. Well, tonight is a unique night. well, you may be watching this in the future, and you may be watching it in the morning, or you may be watching it at 3 a.m. Just want to know, whenever you're watching it, this moment is unique because we're live streaming this on March 11th. March 11th is World Kidney Day. It's National Kidney Day. March is Kidney Month. And our show deals with 4 perspectives, 3 very specifically, about the very unique life experience of receiving a kidney, donating a kidney, and the technology, humanity, and connections therein of a third perspective, the medical perspective. It's a very interesting approach that we are so blessed to have these people here to talk about this experience from these different angles. I think we should just get right into this very rich show that we have prepared for you. And so I'd like to begin my introduction of the main event, the main storyteller we have here, the person who is the centerpiece of this triangle of people that start our show. She is a Moth Slam champion. She's been on the Liar Show, Story Collider, which is a wonderful podcast that deals with stories that relate to science. With Adam Wade, she co-produces a series called On the Waterfront. So she's a storytelling force in the world, and she's a force in many other ways. She's also an attorney, and she has a very important story to tell. I would like to please welcome to the stage Carla Katz.
Thank you, Jude. So I grew up in a family of Italian Catholics and English Jews, which means I'm from New Jersey. And I grew up believing that I'm lucky. I'm really good at those scratch-off lottery tickets, and I have awesome parking karma, which in Hoboken, where I live, is a big fucking deal. But I wasn't feeling very lucky 6 years ago when my doctors told me that my kidneys had failed due to a genetic disease called PKD. And getting on the kidney transplant list is quite a long process with lots of tests. There were EKGs and MRIs and MRAs and my personal favorite, the colonoscopy, but all of it was a pain in the ass. But I wasn't worried, and neither were my doctors. This is the normal process. And when everything is done, I head up to the transplant center and met with my coordinator, who handed me a manila envelope with a DVD inside with my tests on it. And she said, everything looks great except for one thing. We've discovered that you have a large basilar tip brain aneurysm, and essentially a ticking time bomb in my head that if it burst, I would die. And then she said, but the good news is that once you get that fixed, you'll still be able to have a transplant. And I'm thinking to myself, this person has a really skewed misunderstanding of the concept of good news. So not only are my kidneys trying to kill me, but my brain is trying to murder me too. So I walked back to my car in like this stupor, and I was actually afraid to move my head. I was walking like a robot. And I sat behind the wheel looking at the drizzle on my windshield and holding the envelope and holding my breath and thinking, this cannot be happening to me. And I grew up believing I was lucky because my mother told me so. My mother, whose name is Angelina Josefina Scarlata Arlata, is Italian and also very superstitious. And in addition to teaching me how to make a mean lasagna, she taught me very important life lessons in my childhood. Like, if you see a crow, it's a visit from the dead. Never follow an empty hearse or you'll be in death's wake. Honestly, Italians are fucking scary people. It's like my childhood was like a dress rehearsal for The Omen. But my mom was also very magical to me. Once when I was about 8 years old, sitting on my back porch with my mom and my Aunt Dolly in Paterson, New Jersey, where I grew up, drinking lemonade. And my mom heard somebody say, "Angie, come help me." So she ran next door to Tess and Sal's, but everybody was fine. And she ran to the other side. They were also fine. And then she heard it again. "Angie, come help me." So she thought maybe she should go check on Lena. Lena was a very elderly lady that my mom looked in on from time to time that lived a block and a half up from us. And when she got there, she found Lena at the bottom of her basement stairs where she'd fallen. And when my mother got to her, Lena touched her on the arm and said, "Did you hear me? I called for you. I said, Angie, come help me." And it was stories like Lena's that let me grow up believing that the impossible was possible. They sourced my resilience. I mean, how fantastic is it that a stranger, in this case, my mother, could magically hear your need and come save you? And now I have a bomb in my head and I need somebody to come save me. But I was not looking for spirits or magic. I wanted hard, cold science. I wanted first, second, and 10th opinions. And I went on this frantic tri-state search to try and find the best neurosurgeon, sort of like a contestant in the world's worst game show. And when I walked into the office of Dr. Howard Rena at NYU Langone, my gut told me that I'd found the right guy. First of all, Dr. Rena is this sort of big, caring bear of a man. And I love that he told dumb dad neuroscience jokes like, what is a sleeping brain's favorite rock band? REM. And 2 weeks later, I was in a tiny green, depressing hospital room the night before my aneurysm surgery, separated by a thin blue curtain from a woman that just spent the entire night screaming into her phone. And I'm thinking, this could be my very last night on earth. And this is some disappointing bullshit. And when my family and friends left, I really felt utterly alone and scared. And I did that thing they do in the movies, the sort of slow-mo highlight reel of your life. And I thought about my kids' births and their lives and all their milestones. And I also thought about all the things I would miss, like walking them down the aisle or meeting my hypothetical future grandchildren. And I've always been more spiritual than religious, but that night I prayed like a motherfucker. I did not want to be wrong about the whole higher power thing. And then suddenly out of nowhere, this rabbi just sort of magically appears in my doorway. His name was also Katz, like mine. And he said, "God told me to tell you that you're going to be just fine." And then he disappeared. It was like a Jewish mic drop. And in the morning, as I'm being wheeled into surgery on the gurney, all I could do was sort of repeat this mantra, sort of like a command to myself: wake up, wake up, wake up. Spoiler alert, I survived. And I woke up with 7 titanium coils in my head and a wicked headache, but joyously alive. But before long, I realized that was a little misplaced, because even though I had fixed one body part, there still was another one trying to kill me. And the wait on the kidney transplant list is on average about 5 years, and 20 people die waiting on the list every single day. And my best chance of surviving was to find a living donor stat. My brother, Alan, who also has PKD, had had a transplant 5 years before. And we had, during his workup, exhausted all potential family donors. So I knew that I was down to good friends and dead people. And I had no idea how to find a living donor. I did what anybody would do. I Googled how to ask someone for a kidney. And when I typed how to ask someone into Google, Google came back with how to ask someone for money, if they are gay, or for weed. And I thought I would be absolutely ecstatic to be thinking about any of these things. But when I typed in the full sentence, I got my answers. The first was to tell your story to anyone that'll listen. And the second is to write a letter expressing your close proximity to death. So I started telling my story to total strangers. The guy at the bodega that I buy the lottery tickets from, some old boyfriend that messaged me on Facebook, my dog walker. Honestly, I was like a vampire in need of a feed. And all I could see were people walking around with 2 healthy kidneys, and they really only needed 1. And then my brilliant friend Tom helped me draft the letter. It was longer than this, but the gist was, dear blank, even though I've attempted to live a healthy lifestyle, PKD has caused my kidneys to fail, and if I don't find a living donor, I'll die. It was more sophisticated than that, but that was the essence. But I couldn't send the letter. It just felt like too big of an ask. And I am good at asking for things. I'm a union negotiator. I'm a labor lawyer. I ask for things professionally, but this was a big freaking ask. So I waited, and the word got around, and suddenly the angels just started to appear. In all, 14 amazing and insane friends volunteered to go get tested. And I was, and still am, wildly humbled. But at the same time, I also know that the chance of a non-family match are astronomically poor, and I am running out of time. A few weeks later, I'm in yet another doctor's office waiting for probably more bad news when my phone rings, and it's my friend Janine, who I met in law school, and we bonded over the fact that she liked my hair and I liked her English accent. And I pick up and I hear this like ungodly sound. It sounded like a goat. It was like, ah! And it took me a few seconds to realize with her beautiful British accent that she was saying, I matched. And I sat there stunned. I let it sink in, and I couldn't believe that this was going to happen. Janine was going to save me. And Janine is one of these amazing, altruistic humans, even though she likes like weird Brit food like bangers and mash and toad in the hole. But I still worried that, you know, as she went through her testing, something would go wrong, or she would come to her senses and back out. People back out all the time. I mean, it's surgery, it's permanently losing a body part. And I was anxiously fearing phone calls. And the week before the scheduled surgery, my phone rings. I see it's Janine, and I pick up. And she says, is it weird that I'm really excited about this? And I said, yes. Yeah, yes, it is. And the April following the transplant, I ran the Rutgers half marathon And Janine wanted to jump in at the end so the two of us could run together over the finish line, but a cop stopped her and she just yelled at him, "Hey, she's got my kidney and I need to run with it." And he was just completely confused. He was just like, "Yeah, go ahead." And my kidney twin and I ran over the finish line together. 4 kidneys in 2 bodies, 1 in hers and 3 in mine, bonded forever by flesh and blood. And I didn't tell my superstitious, slightly psychic mother about either of the surgeries while they were happening. She was 80 and she'd already had a stroke, and I worried that worrying about me would give her another one. But when everything was good and I finally did tell her, she said that she already knew, and she said that she wasn't worried at all because she knows that I'm lucky. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. There is so much to unpack in that story, and there's a lot of magic, spiritual magic, and the magic of human beings that really show up for each other, that you learn about through stories like this and about the things that people are capable of doing. And I'm absolutely thrilled that we have with us the person that Carla bonded with over hair and accents, and then kidneys, and then ran a marathon with, because they are bonded by flesh and blood and a common story that we're all going to become a part of by listening to that story. So please welcome to our virtual stage Carla's donor, Janine Allen.
Thank you, Jude. So in law school, Carla sat right in front of me. She had the most amazing hair. You can see the comparison to what I have. And I noticed her hair right away, and we became friends, not just because of the hair. We talked a lot during law school, and we became friends there. I wasn't a good friend. I was very busy during those years. I just had my 4th child. I was helping to run a family business, and I was looking to get through law school, which was a dream for me. But I remained friends with her after we graduated in 2008. We remained good friends, and we bonded and created really a good friendship, attending lawyer events together and such. So for many years, we remained friends. And then in summer of 2014, Carla started to not feel well and explained to me that she had PKD. I didn't know PKD. I didn't really know much about kidneys back then. She explained to me, though, that she was looking into the transplant list and told me how long she would have to be on that list. And as friends, obviously, we discussed it, and I told her I was intrigued by the live donor option and that I wanted to be tested. I knew there were other friends of ours that were tested, and I was intrigued by what they had to do to find out how my kidney would match to Carla. How amazing that they could remove one of my kidneys and put it in Carla and help her. I'd given blood before, as often as I could, and I was on the bone marrow transplant list as well. But giving a whole kidney was a whole different thing. It intrigued me. I researched like I've never researched before in my life. And I asked the clinic that she'd chosen to do the transplant if I could be tested. And they sent me the forms, and I sent them back as quickly as I could. And the questions began. What blood type are you? I looked it up. Okay. Have you had any surgeries? I've given birth 4 times. Does that count? Have you had any cancers before? Any disorders? Any psychological issues? And then the biggest blood testing session I've ever had in my life. 15 vials from my one arm. I got through that part. Well, I was sat at my desk at the public defender's office where I worked, and I got a call from the clinic. And they said, "You're a match." I was so excited. I screamed so loud in my office that my colleagues came running and asked me if everything was okay. And I just kept saying, "I'm a match. I'm a match." I called Carla and told her. That became the moment when I realized I was supposed to do this. I wasn't just a match. I was a very good match. And they told us that it looked like we were relatives on paper. How amazing is that? We're not related. It became clear to me that this was my role for Carla, that I had met Carla years before because I was supposed to give her a kidney. I'd remained friends with Carla more than other people at law school. And I think it was because I was supposed to give her a kidney one day. After that came all the testing. They did the blood testing, got through that. And then we had to do an EKG. We had to check my lungs. We had to do every annual testing that exists. And then they had to do, obviously, a kidney scan. And thankfully, I had 2 kidneys. And the purpose of all that testing was to make sure that not only was my 2 kidneys healthy, but also that I had a healthy body to get through surgery and then to survive with just 1 kidney after surgery. I passed through all the tests. I was healthy. I was thankful to be so healthy to be able to help Carla. And that's the point where I became excited. This was a big challenge for my body. They were going to take a kidney out, and I was going to see how my body was going to react. How was I going to change with just 1 kidney? And the ideas intrigued me, and I was excited. I was really excited. Of course, I was a bit worried. Who wouldn't be? It's major surgery. My one question over and over in my mind was, what if I don't wake up? What if surgery doesn't work well? What if they take my kidney and then they can't put it into Carla's body? What got me through those worries before surgery was, I'm helping Carla. If this works, best clinic to go to, great numbers, great data, this is going to work, and I'm going to help Carla. And that got me through that. I still rewrote my will. I got my affairs in order. I prayed. As a former Catholic, I don't pray. I prayed. A week before, I prayed a little more because we had a meeting with the surgical team, the nurses, the surgeons, and we discussed what the surgery would look like. And that was the point when they told me, "Oh, Janine, no, you don't just have a little bit of general anesthesia. We put you on a machine for the 2 hours that you're under." A machine that would breathe for me? Okay, I started to get a little worried. But again, I knew this was going to work because I knew this was my role for Carla. I explained the surgery to my children. They were excited too. They were intrigued by it as well. And in fact, my youngest, who was around 10 at the time, found a surgery app on his iPad and started doing kidney transplants. They were intrigued and excited too. On the day of surgery, I kissed my kids goodbye and I headed to the hospital. They gave me this awful hospital gown that we had to wear. We took photographs together, but those are not public photographs. Nobody will ever see those. And I met my team. I met the 2 anesthesiologists. One was about 60, and I think the other one was about 12. They explained to me that they work together because one administers the drugs and the other one checks to make sure I'm still alive. Okay, that worked out fine. I was wheeled out first. I was wheeled to the operating room. I was awake. And when I was wheeled in, there was a lot of people, a lot of lights. They strapped me to the operating table with my arms out wide and tilted me slightly to my left so that they could access the area. And the anesthesiologist said, "I'm going to give you what's equivalent to about 1 glass of wine, just to calm you down." So I said, "Thank you, that feels nice." And then he said, "I think I'm about to give you about 5 glasses of wine." Boom, I was gone. When I was under, though, I dreamt that I was talking to Carla. It was a very strange situation because I knew I was under, and yet I was clearly talking to Carla. I woke up in PICU. My good friend was by my side, and immediately I said, "Did it work? How's Carla? Is my kidney in there? Did everything go okay?" And of course, Carla was still in surgery. Her surgery was longer than mine. Mine was laparoscopic, and Carla's was open. They had to actually open her to place the kidney in. So she was still in surgery. I napped, I recovered, and when I woke up later, Carla was in PICU, doing well. And as I was wheeled out of PICU, I asked to be wheeled by her bed so I could wave and smile to her. And it was so good to see her laying there smiling. And I thought, oh, this is fabulous. The challenge worked. I was in hospital for a couple of days. The drugs were my friends for those 2 days. The block wore off and it was a little painful, but I got through it. I got up and shuffled around the hospital. First place I shuffled to was Carla's room, and she was in pain. As I said, her surgery was bigger than mine and obviously more painful, and it broke my heart to see her laying like that and in pain. But she's tough, and she fought through the pain. The kidney worked wonderfully, thankfully, and she had the lowest creatinine levels that she's had in years, and the surgery was successful. So I spent about 3 days on my couch at home recovering. Tylenol was my friend. And after about 2.5 weeks, I went back to work. I was a public defender. I was in the holding cells, and I was fine. My abs felt strange for several months because I guess they had to cut through the abs to take the kidney out. But I ran a 5K race just a couple of months after surgery, and it became my new PR. It was my one kidney PR. I often forget that I donated, that I have one kidney. It really doesn't affect my life. I do hydrate a lot more. I guess we all should anyway. But I have to say, Carla and I are still close friends, obviously. We're now connected by this amazing experience that we had together. And just knowing that I could help her, essentially save her life, it's just one of the best things I've done in my whole life. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Again, so much to talk about in this take on this same event, this kidney transplant story. You know, often storytelling takes us into worlds that we might never be a part of, that meeting characters that we would never in our lives encounter. And storytelling can make us learn about things we just wouldn't otherwise know about and engage us in that. This story is something that really could affect any of us at any time. It's something that any of us could sign up to be a kidney donor. And so this is a unique perspective that we have both sides of that experience, but we're not done. We have another side of that exact event. We have the doctor who is at Carla's side every day during the transplant and thereafter, and is currently her nephrologist. And he's going to share his perspective on this process and on this event and on his work. I'd like to welcome to our stage Dr. Ryan Goldberg.
Thank you. So my name is Ryan Goldberg. I'm a transplant nephrologist, and that means that I'm a medical kidney doctor taking care of transplant patients. I'm not a surgeon, and usually when people hear that, they're a little bit disappointed because I guess a nephrologist doesn't quite have the same cachet as a surgeon, but I'm not a surgeon. I spend most of my time taking care of people who have had kidneys. I spend time taking care of people who would like to get on the transplant list. And I spend a good part of my time taking care of people who like to donate. And so I've been doing this now for close to 15 years. And I got into this position kind of through a slightly different way. When I first went out of college, I was an English major and spent a few years working in book publishing. And around that time, I started having my own medical problem. And now in hindsight, it was certainly not very severe, but it did require that I see a number of doctors, relatively frequently, had some procedures. And during that time, being relatively dissatisfied with what I was doing, I thought that maybe I could do this. One particular doctor who I had took a lot of time, explained things very well, generally was just a very good guy, and he kind of inspired me to think that maybe I should try to go back to school and get this done. So I made it into med school, went into an internal medicine residency program, and then into a nephrology fellowship. And then in nephrology, you start to see the entire spectrum of kidney medicine care. And unfortunately, that includes a lot of dialysis, which is what happens when people have failed kidneys and have not yet had a transplant. Dialysis serves its purpose. It keeps people going. Very rarely does it allow people to thrive. And as part of my fellowship, I started doing some transplant medicine as well. And I thought that, wow, this is really a much better option for people who have failed kidneys. Life can become normal off of dialysis, back to the normal life people had envisioned for themselves. Also, I really like the other physicians who were transplant nephrologists. And I think you find a mentor and somebody who inspires you, and that helps kind of create the path you end up following. So I went into a transplant fellowship, got a job, came out to my current location, and have been working there ever since. I think the biggest part of my job that I like the most is the connections I get to make with people. I wouldn't consider myself a primary care doctor, but I end up doing a lot of primary care. I see my patients often. The intensity and frequency of that follow-up gets less and less as people get further and further out from their transplant surgery. But because the initial part is so intense, and because really so much has been on the line, you really get the opportunity to form a pretty strong bond with your patients. The time that I spend helping people get on the list is challenging. It is a complicated process for a lot of people to manage. Sorry. And it sometimes takes a lot of hand-holding to get people through all the tests, to make it to the list. And then the question always becomes, does that person have a living donor? It's easy for me to tell people that they need to talk about their issues. They need to ask people, can they donate for them? But it's got to be one of the hardest asks ever to put out there. It's not even quite like a marriage proposal, because at least when you're proposing, you can give somebody a ring. To get a kidney, you're not allowed to pay anybody anything. So it's a very hard question. And what I usually tell people to do, and Carla mentioned this before, is really to tell your story. We get a lot of people coming through every year who were never asked to be a donor, but they learned that their individual needed a kidney. And the person who ends up getting their kidney, it might be somebody they never would have thought of, somebody they knew, when they were young adults, maybe at an old job, but somehow that individual heard about their need and decided to come forward. And working with donors is a humbling and amazing experience, because really there's nothing more altruistic, whether you're giving a kidney to your spouse or giving your kidney to a stranger. The surgeons consider it a sacred operation, because it's the only time somebody goes through all this testing, is declared healthy, and is then invited into the operating room to have a surgery. Every operation has some inherent risk to it, but usually that operation has a tangible, meaningful benefit for the person having the surgery. Whether it's a gallbladder coming out, a sick appendix, or God forbid, a tumor, they have a benefit. For a donor, they're going through the surgery, taking on the risks of general anesthesia, of an operation, of a couple days in the hospital and recovery. And at the end, at least on paper, they don't get a benefit. It's their recipient that gets the benefit. And I always hope that that individual watching the recipient get better, watching them join their life as they left it before, really does provide them a benefit as that experience ripples back into their life. But it's a tremendous thing, and it's an honor to work with individuals walking that path. And then it's really a pleasure to see their recipients get better, to make it through the first couple of weeks. I consider the first month to be the first big milestone where the staples have come out, any remaining drains or stents and all that stuff has been removed. And then hopefully the next couple of months is just boring. Boring is good in that situation. You don't want excitement. And then at about 3 months, people get back to their lives, go back to school, go back to work. Young women can have children. It really does start a next chapter for the person who has had either failing or failed kidneys. And dialysis, well, it is a life-sustaining therapy. It's nothing like getting a transplant. And so it's really a pleasure to do what I do. It's an honor to work with these individuals. And sometimes I just can't believe that I get to continue doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Goldberg. So you were with Carla through this whole process, she says. You were right there with her.
Yeah, I saw her in recovery, in the recovery room, and saw her daily while she was in the hospital. Saw her twice a week for the first month after, weekly, monthly. And now I think it's approximately every 4 months or so.
That it's a remarkable thing to go through that with somebody and then follow up thereafter and then here we are all talking about it together on World Kidney Day. I'm just so grateful that you took the time to join us and that you said this important thing about the bonding that happens. So that's the theme I'm hearing about between Carla and Janine, and also that you have this bonding experience with patients as they go through this process. I guess both sides, that you bond with the people on both sides, or more the patient that's receiving the kidney?
No, I do see a lot of donors. I am part of their process. I do a lot of their education. I do pre-surgical meetings, walking the donor and the recipient through what to expect while they're here in the hospital. See donors, initially, they come back to see us roughly a week after their surgery, after they're discharged. See them there. And it was really interesting hearing Janine's experience, because I don't get a chance to see them, 5 years after,
Right.
And so hearing that she seldomly even considers what she did those years ago, that her life is really still so very normal and really unaffected by, at least physically unaffected. It sounds like she, had a very good experience, and that makes me very happy. But that her life is as it would have been had she not done this.
That is a remarkable thing to hear that. It's actually that she feels, because she's well and she feels, well, we'll hear from her about that. But I agree that, I can only imagine what it's like for you, having gone through that with the both of them, and now to be talking about it directly. So the power of telling the story is something that you empower and encourage patients to do, to tell their story to the people in their lives, and I guess from Carla's piece, people that are not in their lives but might become a part of the story. And to expand on the storytelling in public health aspect, and that's also relating to what we're talking about with what people need when they're in need of a kidney. We have a storytelling coach and a person who works using coaching people in public health. Please, let's welcome Tina Bakehouse, my dear friend and colleague. Let's hear from Tina. Welcome, Tina.
Well, thank you, Jude. I'm excited to be here. And all of us love a great story. In fact, as a child, whether it was sitting in a big orange chair, snuggled up with my grandmother, hearing her read Mr. Grabbitt's storybook over and over again, or hearing my dad tell really funny stories at the end of my bed, or reading voraciously books pretending I'm Nancy Drew, I've grown into an adult that sees that power of storytelling. And so I was lucky enough, for the last several years, I've had the opportunity to work with healthcare professionals, organizations, to use storytelling as a powerful tool. And so for one healthcare institution, we actually worked with a group of medical professionals, specifically in internal medicine, and they were struggling with this concept of it's my way. And so as they use stories to sort of talk about perspectives from nurses, perspectives from doctors. It was really getting into that human experience and humanizing and personalizing those health issues. So they evolved and became much more of a team where my way became our way. And so it strengthened the relationships internally within the organization. And that's that influence of storytelling on organizational culture, that as a whole, that the mission is not just a statement for this organization now. It is a way of life. It's what they breathe, and that the stories that they're telling each other are now transplanted, pun intended, out into the community and shared. And so that's one example organizationally how stories impacted their culture. Secondly, I had the opportunity a few years ago, I live on a farm here in Southwest Iowa, and I had this idea of healthy eating and using the arts to teach families where their food comes from. And I created an ag arts camp and had the Ronald McDonald House come. And what was really powerful was following a 2-day camp where it had young people with the patients with their and family members with their parents there. They connected. And I found that they had improved communication. They improved their just internally within their families. But then what was even stronger was 2 days later, the executive director called and said, "What did you do? What did you do?" And it was storytelling and using art that drew them together and made that bond. Now, the last piece that I've really enjoyed getting to use storytelling as a tool that allows people to communicate effectively and share who they are was through the individual coaching of healthcare professionals, and one in which was doing a TEDx talk. For years, she wanted to be a nurse, and she went through this experience of seizures and wasn't able to be a nurse. And it was through being able to work through the tears that she became aware that she was struggling with that, but it was healing to her to talk through it with somebody else, and then realize that her story could help someone else, and that she grew into acceptance of not only she can be an educator, not a healthcare practitioner due to her seizures, but she started a camp to help other people who are undergoing those kinds of situations. And so it's through storytelling and getting that ability and that practice that the different healthcare professionals not only gained confidence, they really embodied that affective communication, but also it just strengthened their content and the relatability factor, because stories truly do resonate. They transport from our brains into our hearts, and they stick with us. They have that stay power. And even stories are 22 times more impactful and memorable than data. And I know, as Carla said earlier, that wanting that hardcore science, I think that's where healthcare professionals struggle using storytelling, because more people probably don't label themselves as storytellers, but we're all born natural orators and narrators of our lives. And that's the important piece that I cannot stress enough, is no matter where you are, I love that Carla had the courage to tell the story over and over again to strangers, to family members, and that Janine is willing to share the story as well, because together that they can make that impact to influence others to tell their stories. And so with that, I'm just really excited to be here tonight, to be part of this great group, a panel, and I'm really looking forward to further discussion about storytelling in healthcare.
Thank you, Tina. So let's bring back Carla and Janine so that we're all here together. And round of applause to everybody here. There's so much to unpack, but before, I have thoughts, but I'm wondering, first I did want to say this, it's at the very beginning of the show, so I want to take this moment to say that this event gives new meaning to the phrase giving of yourself. It's so, I thought about that all day, and I wanted to get that in at the top of the show, but now I'm getting it in now. But it really does, pardon me? Oh, okay. So the willingness to put yourself out there, for Carla to the first question that I had for anybody, and then I wondered if anybody wanted to discuss, but Carla, when you're instructed early in this process to ask people to tell your story and ask people if they can help, can you share a little bit more about what you had to find within yourself to do that?
That's a good question, because I'm a very outgoing person, but asking for something like that just seemed impossible. And another good friend of both Janine and mine, Tom, who I mentioned in my story, who's listening right now, started telling people for me. And I actually think wasn't he the person, Janine, that told you, right? So yep. Tom had helped me sort of draft this letter that never got sent. And then Tom started telling people. And then I sort of felt more courage to start telling people telling the story without asking for them to do anything about it, just where I was. And some of my good friends knew my brother's story, which was also fantastic. My brother is young. He's my baby brother, but his transplant was 5 years before mine. And he's an EP. He does heart surgery, mostly devices, right? And so a friend of his matched, who is a cardiologist, and I flew out to Pittsburgh for the day of his surgery. And it turned out that literally the day of the surgery, they realized his friend had kidney cancer that was advanced. And so they did the same nephrectomy, saved his life. His friend's own altruism saved his own life. And then my brother my brother was left without a donor, but then eventually his primary nurse, gave him a kidney. And I sort of was walking that path with him and I had no idea that 5 years later it would be me, right? Doing the same thing. So it's a hard thing to do. And without there is no other word than angels like Janine that step up. It is because it's a hard thing to ask and it's a hard thing to do. But I did tell the story literally to everyone I could think of. I just started sort of doing that and, hoping that the universe would provide. And, Janine and I, it's funny because my dad is English. My dad's born and raised, and we think we must be related because we met. We might really be sisters.
We could be.
Yeah,
and I just loved, Carla, though, that you had the courage to tell your story. And the more you got going with it, it's that practice that I think it probably becomes easier.
It does. Yeah.
So one thing we ask of our recipients looking for a donor, a lot of them really can't get over that hump, ask that question. But often their spouse or their children or friend really doesn't have that many issues asking that question because it's really not for them. And so we'll often encourage our recipients to kind of have an advocate, or we used to call it a champion, somebody who can, ask the question for their person. And another thing that I tell my patients looking is that you really have to be okay with no, and you can't have that impact how you feel about that individual because it doesn't mean they don't love you, they don't care for you, they don't want to see you do well. For some people, it's just kind of not in the spectrum of things that they're going to do. Doesn't make them bad people, but really, I think a lot of people are afraid to ask because they don't want, how are they going to respond to that no? How are they going to feel if their sister, who's healthy, but just says no? So understanding that that's also okay, I think is important.
That is thank you for saying that, because that's something that social workers or people working with family members or somebody who's going through this should be aware of, to empower people on both sides, because asking is difficult. It's necessary. and we're dealing with the realities of other human beings and what they're capable of doing. So it is, thank you for mentioning that, because that's important, I think, for the mental health side of this whole thing. And I wanted to say, does anybody have a comment before I ask another question?
No. Okay.
Okay. So Janine had said that you said, and this is more like an esoteric question, but it's so interesting to me that you came to this feeling that we're friends because I'm meant to give my friend to become literally I'm going to become a part of her and she's going to become a part of me. I don't know if you could just share a little bit more about that in your psyche.
Sure. I think it happened because everything seemed to happen so smoothly, apart from obviously the aneurysm surgery that Carla had to do. But I mean, the testing process was very smooth. I sent in my paperwork. They replied right away. I think I was the first or the second person to send in to send in the paperwork. So they were very quick to respond. But I had that feeling right away, I'll be honest. When I heard about it and I researched it, it just seemed to make sense to me. I've been told, because I've given birth 4 times, never had an issue, very healthy. And my doctor had said before that my body is very strong. So when this came up, I thought, I bet you I could do that. It seemed to happen from the very beginning. But once I got the match and they told me how well I matched, and again, it just flowed. Like all my testing was right. And I thought, this is meant to be. It's meant to be. I mean, I didn't stay in touch with a lot of law school friends as much as I stayed in touch with Carla. And of course, it's because I like Carla and we get along well and we're good friends. But I always felt there was something that something was supposed to happen to make us stronger friends. And yeah, and I think honestly, psyche-wise, maybe that's what got me through, right? I'm not a religious person anymore. So maybe that was the strength that got me through the hard times, like knowing that I was helping her because she wasn't feeling well. Well, yeah, because that's my role. That's what I'm supposed to do. That happened afterwards too. When I didn't feel well after surgery, those first 3 days on the couch at home were rough. I talked to Carla several times a day, checking in. She felt good. Okay, that's why I did it. It was like that encouragement of getting through that. So perhaps it was a psyche thing. To me, it was just, that was my role. That's what I was supposed to do.
Well, there is, there is some studies behind that idea that when you have a strong sense of meaning, when something has a strong sense of purpose, that it makes us more resilient. And so that was in you. And then there's, hard times that we can't even anticipate. And you were able to, that probably was part of the psychological muscle that was involved with that. I want to say before we go further, anybody watching, if you have a question for anybody here, please ask the question. And if there are questions, please put them up on the screen and we'll respond to them. And so I wanted to ask Dr. Goldberg about something that has gone from my mind. No, talking about when people don't know their donor. I just wondered if you could share something about is there any side of this, the psychosocial side of this, that maybe we should know about when someone doesn't know their donor or the donor doesn't know their recipient?
So each year we get probably a half dozen referrals from individuals who don't have a recipient in mind, but they know there's a need and they just want to help.
Amazing.
Their workup medically is the same. From a psychosocial perspective, usually we go, perhaps a little bit deeper, checking on their support system, always trying to find out if anybody's looking for some sort of gain. I mean, you don't want to paint people in a negative light, but just to make sure that, there's not some other motive they're trying to, accomplish. Once, somebody's had their whole education, both on the medical side, the psychosocial side, usually we send them home, let it sit in for a while, let them think about it, let them call us back to see if they'd like to move forward. And then we do the testing. there's a lot of workup, a lot of visits, a lot of phone calls, and it's like this work up. And then once they do donate, that's like the climax. And then they're in the hospital for a couple of days, they go home. And we just want to make sure that people are supported, once they do get home, because they don't see their person get better. They don't see the benefits of what they've done. And for some people, that can be, a bit of a down point. And our goal is to leave everybody essentially in the shape we found them in after, a few weeks of recovery. And we don't want to, cause any, fractures in families. If there's somebody who's very much against this person donating, often we move forward. We'd like to leave people as whole as we can, minus the kidney. And so when people don't have a recipient that they know, we just tend to go slower and make sure that, all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, things like that.
Thank you for that. And so, Tina, I'm wondering in your work if you could see how helping people, like the way you talked about the storytelling internally with an organization, bonded people closer, helped them see each other's point of view. It seems like storytelling might play a role here. I mean, in listening to Janine, for example, tell what it's like to be a donor, I feel more inspired to be a donor than I ever have in my life. And it's scary. I mean, I'm not saying it, it's a scary thing, but I feel differently having heard this about the fear.
Absolutely. So a couple of years ago, my family received a letter, Christmas letter, and it was my former high school principal who shared her story of donating a kidney to her aunt. And just recently, sadly, the aunt passed that news in a letter, but it was that story that I had never, and I will say, Janine, you took it up a few more notches for me. But that first letter, I, like you, Jude, never in a million years thought I would donate something like an organ inside of my body. And so reading the text of it and knowing the person took it up a notch of, okay, this is tapping into that pathos, that emotional appeal that is maybe making it a little more persuasive of I might consider. But then after hearing Janine and that heartfelt, beautiful story of how running the finish line and they are literally connected together and you gave Carla life, it definitely made a huge impact. And I feel that that's where the data is data and it's science driven and it's facts, but stories humanize that. They make the abstract, like the idea of an organ out of your body. We try to picture that, but it's that feeling that the storyteller, in this case, Janine and Carla, both shared together, and how beautiful to get both sides of the story. It was sort of like the kidneys became one again. They ran that finish line through a storytelling lens. And so absolutely, I think it has it's a persuasive power. You're the protagonist in your story. And the more you share it, the more, that you talk about it, the closer you convert people. They need to hear it a lot to have that conversion.
Mm-hmm. So Carla, I know you're a professional storyteller and you are out there and telling stories in shows. I mean, wherever, all the time. I'm wondering if you've ever heard from somebody that they were inspired by your story in terms of their own journey in this way.
The very first story I told on a Moth stage was in Brooklyn and it was a very early version of just the kidney story. Doesn't look anything like what I told today, but so it was insane how many people walked up to me afterwards when I got off the stage to hug me and say, I had a kidney transplant. I was a donor. There were like 15 people that were either a recipient or a donor, and not just a kidney. I think somebody was sort of part of a liver or but it was remarkable. And they were, I found that amazing. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers.
Well, it does it. So one, it's a community of people that we don't even know how wide ranging that community is.
Right.
And when you speak for them, people really, they're grateful that you spoke about this.
Right.
And it is this is why I think, I'm kind of blown away that we were able to actually get this panel of human beings to be in the same virtual space on the same night on National World Kidney Day.
This is the first time
all the magical things come together. It's World Kidney Day.
This is the first time
It's very
I've heard Janine
serendipitous.
tell her story.
Yes. Well, and there's a question in the chat for Janine, Jude. I think John has a question for.
Good. John, could you put the question up? Can we see it? Janine, curious if you got any pushback from your family for donating to a non-family member along the lines of, what if one of your children needs a kidney in the future?
Yes, I did. Some members of my family were concerned about the risks of the surgery. I was concerned about the surgery, but I did enough research that I felt comfortable. I mean, the clinic that Carla chose for the surgery is one of the best in the country. Their data is good. I did a lot of research with that. So I think I persuaded the family members not to be so afraid, that everything would go well and that I'd be fine. Yes, that question of, and it wasn't a family member that asked me that, but what if one of your kids need a kidney did come up. And of course that made me feel bad. Like, of course, if my children want a kidney, yeah, I've only got one. I don't have another spare. But I didn't think that was a kind question, to be honest. And I do have 4, so I guess they could share. But my kids are healthy. Of course, if I had a family member who needs a kidney, that would be the first choice, especially my children, but they're all healthy. We don't have PKD, and I know that PKD is a genetic issue that is with many family members. So I interestingly got the most pushback from my primary care physician.
Interesting.
He actually said, by the way, he's no longer my primary care physician. He said to me, this is how he said it: "No, you're not going to donate a kidney."
He did?
Okay, well, thank you. And I think he was going by the surgery that's been done in the past 20 years ago. And over time, I've met a lot of other kidney donors. I'm part of a great Facebook group. Shout out to my group. We're a private group, but we're all kidney donors and we discuss issues. So there's people on there that gave a kidney 32 years ago. Their surgery is very, very different to what we have today. And I think my primary care physician knew about those surgeries, but didn't know the recent, it's all laparoscopic, that I have a tiny scar about this big. I can't believe they got my kidney out of that. But I have 3 scars this big and then 1 this big. And you really can't see them. Like, I think my primary care physician was going by past surgeries where, the whole stomach is opened, and obviously there's a lot more risk to those surgeries. But data shows that people can live with 1 kidney and be healthy. So, again, some family members had issues with it. I think I persuaded them with the research that I did that I'm okay. So.
Yeah. So you had to work that through with them. I mean, that people have to be honest and share their concerns, and your family or whoever so it's just highlighting that a lot of conversation has to happen, a lot of open and honest conversation about a family member taking a medical risk, which could impact everybody's life, and that they got on board with it.
Yes, they did. They did, very much so. And especially my kids were very supportive, bless them. I mean, my youngest was 10. When I was home on the couch, they were right there with me, helping me, and they were excited and intrigued by it. My daughter wants to be a doctor, so I think that helped her excitement. But yes, in the end, everybody was on board and very excited. And, a week before surgery, everybody was encouraging us. And the day of surgery was a very busy day on Facebook on Carla and I's page. It was, posting updates. Everybody across the world was waiting to hear the news. So it was very encouraging by the time the surgery was scheduled.
There's a real theme in everything that everyone has said tonight about the power of social networks. And by that, I don't mean social media. I mean, real social networks, emotional networks, friendships, all different kinds of alliances, and family as well. Because like Dr. Goldberg said, sometimes the person who needs the kidney gets an ally that is able to speak for them or paves the way, to open that conversation up. Sometimes it could be, so like a network of people are affected by each other, and that is a theme here of the power of that. And storytelling is one of those ways that I think those networks grow. And I appreciate very much all of you sharing so much, because storytelling is a way to get, as Tina said, from the head into our heart and where we stand, and where we'll be if this comes up in our family. And it could be at any time. Someone could be impacted, and someone could decide to get on a transplant list and have to have that conversation with their family. It could be anybody, any of us. Do we have are there any other questions that we see coming up before we?
Well, and as you're looking, Jude, just to piggyback on what you were saying about that, imagine, in that situation when you get asked that question, Janine, or someone who's considering the organ donation, the amount that it can inspire people if you use a story, and that you're able to share, just starting with the story of how you've known Carla, and your relationship, and really focusing on that relationship and that story element, to tap into the hearts of the people asking that question, because I think it would motivate them to maybe step back a beat and recognize the humanness of it all.
Right.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Dr. Goldberg to comment on sort of the success of the transplant living donor versus cadaver donor for kidneys, because I think, part of the message here is, why donor? And people said that to me, well, why can't you just get on the list? And
well, first, since we're talking about listing you, the wait time now in our area is probably pushing 8 or 9 years. So it's almost doubled.
Wow.
And there's just so many people waiting. And each year, there are only so many people who pass away and have their families donate. And so more people are added each year than actually transplanted. So the wait gets longer and longer.
Wow.
Every time a living donor kidney is better than a deceased donor. Deceased donor is second best, right? It's still much better than dialysis. But because of the time benefit with a living donor, the short, what we consider cold time, meaning how long the kidney's been from its previous person into the new one, that has a big impact on how quickly the kidney works in the new person. Living donor is just much easier, for the person getting it to recover from. Outcome-wise, living donors are pushing 99%, 1 year working. Deceased donors, kind of depends on how you break them down, but probably on average, 92, 93% at 1 year. But living donors, for the person who needs a kidney, that's like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's the best option for them.
I have a question for Carla, actually. I was curious, you said you had multiple friends line up, and Janine went right away. How did the other friends react after that moment?
Well, it was interesting. 3 friends matched. That's amazing, right? So, and they ranked them by 2 things. Age, Janine was the youngest, and Janine was the first. So there was sort of the motivation. I had one friend who is very humorous, my friend Dennis, who I have known for most of my life. His uncle and my dad were best friends, and he had always said to me that he would be my kidney donor. Polycystic kidney disease there's sort of a long workup, right? I knew I had it 20 plus years before my kidneys eventually failed from it, right? And there's no sense of what that timeline would be. So Dennis was always going to be my donor. And when he kept calling the transplant center, and they told him, no, well, we already have a match. In fact, we have several. And eventually somebody from the transplant center called me and said, you need to get your friend Dennis to stop calling. Because he's driving us crazy. He can't be the donor. We're done. But it was, God, so remarkable to me that there was a willingness to even go get tested, right? Even to go get that, take that first step. It was very, very moving. And, you know, that it makes you feel unworthy, right? Like how, you know, how does Janine do this remarkable thing? It's just extraordinary. It is. It is, you know, Angel, and I am not religious, as you heard in my story, but it really did feel, it felt like there was a magic and between us, and that the way that it happened, how successful it was, how smooth it was, aneurysm aside,
right?
Incredible.
It's, I can understand why someone who's been given this gift would say something like it makes us feel unworthy. At the same time, having been through a brain aneurysm and then facing a terminal illness without this, you're a hero in your own way, and you are helping the world to know what it's like. And you bravely tell this, what it's like, all of it. And that, you know, that's a powerful thing. So if that, I don't know if that, I think that could, you know, balance some of this, the sense of what you got so much and you give so much.
And I make sure Janine makes sure that I keep the kidney healthy.
There you go. See there.
I do exercise every day. I eat well.
And I, you know, when Carla goes for a run, I can say, well, I've been for a run.
Nice.
I went for a run, so I'm good for the
You're good.
Fitness tracker on my kidney so that Janine gets the steps.
Nice. Did we go for a run today?
Right, exactly.
This I didn't.
You know, one thing that people tell me that they didn't know until they've heard my story is that you keep the old kidneys.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Right. That's a common thing. I didn't know that actually until my brother had his transplant. And I said, say what? They don't replace one of them or any, but no, you just keep the kidneys, and the new kidney goes in front in sort of the, in your hip, you know, in your abdomen instead of in your back.
Dr. Goldberg, is that so that Carla has backup in case the new kidney is rejected?
Keeping her old kidneys in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I mean, so I think her old kidneys at this point are probably contributing very little, if anything, to her overall kidney function. You know, the very, very occasionally we ask that the old kidneys come out. In that situation, Carla, is typically PKD.
Right.
You know, because sometimes the kidneys can just be so very big that there's physically not room in that right or left lower belly to put the new kidney in. Even if somebody has normally the kidneys stay in. It's just more that the new kidney would never go in that position. Anatomically, what comes out from the donor, you know, length of artery, vein, and the ureter, the urine tube, you know, the lengths just need to be a little bit more proximal to the bladder.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's very clinical.
That's a fun fact.
Yeah. But it is a fun fact that I mean, it's just an interesting thing. And then it's a good question. Would it be medically really complicated if they needed to take them out? Would that make the surgery much harder on the patient if they needed to take the old ones out?
So if the old ones do have to come out, we don't do it simultaneously. So we'd have the old ones removed let them recover for a couple weeks. And if they're not on dialysis, they have to spend a couple weeks, 3 weeks on dialysis, and then put the new one in.
Oh, that's
it can be a sizable surgery, especially for PKD.
Well, speaking of PKD, we have some organizations that we want to share with people that promote and work with people involved with these dilemmas. So let's put up some of what you wanted to share there. Did anybody want to discuss this? Was this Carla? Was this you?
Yeah, I put that up. The PKD Foundation does research looking for, and there finally is one medication. I don't know how effective it is, and that helps stop the cysts. You know, PKD means that polycystic kidney disease means both of your kidneys have cysts, and they grow over time to the point where your kidney function disappears, right? So, and they can be my kidneys are very large, but not as much. Some people, they're gargantuan. And the foundation does a lot of education about PKD and does a lot of advocacy and puts money into research to try and sort of stop it in its tracks, right? That's the ideal. Transplant isn't a solution, right? The new kidney doesn't last forever in your body as if you had a normal life, right? So somebody with PKD is better off with a medication that might stop the kidney cysts from growing.
Right. Okay.
Is that successful, Dr. Goldberg?
The new medication?
Yeah, it's called
Gynarque.
Gynarque. Yeah.
I think it definitely slows down cyst growth. I don't know that it prevents failure. It slows it down though.
Okay. So we had there were a few different organizations that you wanted to share about. Janine, did you had one, or the doctor also had one?
Yes, I think we talked about kidney.org and the National Registry, where there's more information basically about live donation and the different types of donation. You can actually do a chain donation where if you don't match with someone, you can donate to someone else, and then that someone else. So they have chains. I heard just recently about a chain of 7 people being saved by donation, but because they didn't match each other, they create a chain, which is pretty interesting. So that information's on the websites to read through. There's a lot of, and that's where I started when, initially the research on live donation, and you start reading about it, and there's so many websites that you can get more data information, but really those are good places to start.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Goldberg, did you have an organization that you mentioned?
I had put up the National Kidney Foundation as well. I mean, it's just a very good, I think, well-researched, legitimate website. Has a lot of information for people in need of kidneys, kidney disease, donors. They provide a lot of money for education, put on a lot of programs. It's a good organization.
Thank you for that. And I was, because people watching the show might be surprised to know, well, when I was putting the show together and I was thinking about who would come on and talk, and I was talking to lots of different social workers, everybody, and just like Carla saying, telling your story at the Moth, suddenly people were saying, oh, my son-in-law is waiting for a kidney. I know another person that's waiting for a kidney. So people need this information more than we may even be aware of. And so Tina, did you want to share anything about what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm excited. I'm getting to speak for the state of Iowa for public health and to talk about the importance of structure, simplicity, and story in terms of their message making so that they can make messages that matter and hopefully enhance the connection with people externally as well as internally too, to have that clarity. And so making those messages that matter, using the tool of storytelling, being aware of that structure that makes an impact. And so if you want to follow me, I do help organizations and individuals, not only in the healthcare world, but also nonprofits, for-profits. You can check me out on LinkedIn. So it's just Tina Bakehouse, LinkedIn. And I also have a Facebook page for Tina B LLC, where I post some helpful tips on communication strategies, storytelling included. And it's an exciting time. And it's especially exciting when healthcare says, hey, we are open to look at communication analysis and how can we know better, do better.
Thank you so much. I wonder, Carla, do you have any shows coming up or anything that you want to talk about?
No, nothing coming up. I got a little burnt out on the Zoom shows. I love the stage. I miss it terribly. But I have a website that has carlakatz.com that has a lot of videos up, and I'm doing the one thing I have been doing in the virtual world is acting and voiceover work. So I do that in addition to storytelling. So that I have actually been able to do on Zoom and formats like this.
Right. Wonderful.
So no storytelling shows yet, but maybe in the immediate future.
Well, people will have your website and they can keep going back there. And when things open up again, I think we're all going to be just get me on that stage. Get me up there.
Right?
I got to tell some stories.
Oh, amen. Live theater, ready for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Janine, did you have anything you wanted to share that's coming up for you?
No, just
okay.
Leading my regular one kidney life and doing great.
So, Dr. Goldberg, Dr. Goldberg's the one that alerted us to World and National Kidney Day. Anything you want to say in closing here, Dr. Goldberg?
No, nothing really. Thank you, though. Thank you for having me.
Well, I am so grateful to all of you. What a terrific experience to talk about this event, this event, and how it has universal implications for everybody listening. And it was so generous of you to share yourselves with us tonight and all of your information. There's so much to think about and to learn, and I'm going to go to those websites, and we are all going to be enriched, and we are completely inspired.
And thank you for putting this together, Jude.
Oh,
and thank you, Dr. Goldberg.
My joy.
And Tina.
Yes. Next week.
Wonderful.
So for those of you that subscribe, you may already know, but if you haven't, you still have time. But next week we have a really fabulous show that's quite different. The name of that show is Runaway Princess, a hopeful tale of hooking heroin and happiness, by Mary Goggin. She's an actress. She's amazing. And we will have a talk back with Kevin Allison, who's the host and creator of the Risk Show and podcast. That is going to be a very rich and interesting show as well, in a very different way. I am so looking forward to that experience. So thank you all of you for watching. Whenever you are, if you're in the future, I hope it's going well. If you're here with us tonight, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And I hope you'll be back. Totally True Things. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.